Hello, amazing people. Welcome back to the No Brainer podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the modern Olympics, some of the biggest controversies in the modern Olympics, some of the biggest scandals in the modern Olympics, and the 2024 Paris Olympics. So, this is a part 2 of our 2-part episode about the Olympics. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, I suggest you listen to part 1 for more information on the rise and fall of the ancient Olympics and the revival of the Olympics, which leads to today's topic of the modern Olympics. For more science, history, philosophies, and conspiracy topics and stories, make sure to follow the No Brainer podcast on Spotify and Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube and comment below future topics you want us to talk about. So without further ado, let's dive in. So the first modern Olympic happened in 1896. So obviously, continuing from the last episode, the Olympics was revived by Pierre de Coubertin, who you might have heard of in this year's Olympics because he was French and known as the founder or the father of the modern Olympics. So in 1896, the first modern Olympic game was held in Athens, Greece. This is because obviously Athens is the capital of Greece, and the Olympics originated from the ancient Greek civilization. Now, the first Olympics is, very different from the Olympics now. So there was a total of only 280 participants from 13 nations around the world, and they competed in only 43 events, which included obviously track and field, swimming, gymnastics, cycling, wrestling, weightlifting, fencing, shooting, and tennis, with tennis being the only sport with a ball. These are obviously all sports that are still held in the Olympics today and are still very popular. So, however, though, back in the days in the first modern Olympics, the competitors were all men, and some were tourists who signed up to watch, but there were very few tourists. And part of what's special about the Olympics was that in the first modern Olympics, the tracks and field events, which were also held back in the days of the ancient Greeks, were held at the Panathenaic Stadium, which was originally built in 330 BC by the ancient Greeks. So the Greeks did a very good job, and the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, did a great job of restoring the stadium by the ancient Greeks as the first stadium for the tracks and field events. And the first marathon competition was also held in this Olympics. And what's interesting is that the marathon was actually inspired by a legendary messenger back in 490 BC who ran from the city of Marathon to the city of Athens with a message of Nike or victory, and died after the 26-mile race. So he ran 26 miles from the site of Marathon to Athens to deliver the message, and this spirit is now known as the Marathon, which is the site he ran from, and it inspired the first game of Marathon, which was held in the first Olympics, and the Greek athlete Spiridon Lewis won the marathon in the first Olympics. However, though, like I mentioned before, this first Olympics lacked tourism because in 1896, Pierre de Coubertin, as the IOC president, led the Olympic Games through its early years, which lacked popular support and were overshadowed by the World's Fairs and the wars around the world. So the first Olympic Games that was successful did not come until 1924, 100 years ago, in Paris, with more than 3,000 athletes from 44 nations, including over 100 women. So this was also the year where the first Winter Olympic Games was held, which was majorly because of the success of the Olympic Games in Paris in 1924. And Coubertin retired in 1925, right after the Paris Olympics and became the foremost international sports competition, as it now gained popular support from around the world. So what about the Winter and Paralympics? Well, the Winter Olympics were held in the same year as the Summer Olympics, all the way until 1994, where they were changed to the other year. And the first Paralympic Games were held in 1960, 1 week after the Summer Olympics in Rome, which featured only 3 events, but they included archery, snooker, and swimming. So the term Paralympics comes from parallel and parallel structure of hosting these games alongside the Summer Olympics, which means they never changed their dates like the Winter Olympics. Throughout 100 plus years of history, the Olympics has been pretty successful, other than the 3 times it was cancelled due to all world wars, including 1916, 1940, and 1944. And some of the most notable Olympic athletes includes the famous Michael Phelps with 23 golds and 28 medals throughout 2004 to 2016, Larissa Latiniana with 18 medals, 9 of them being gold, all in gymnastics back in 1956 to 1964. Usain Bolt, the fastest man ever, who we all know, holds the world record for 100 meters, 200 meters, and 4 times 100 meter relay throughout 2008 to 2016. Tricia Zorn from the US with the most successful Paralympian with 55 medals, 41 of them being gold in swimming, ranging from 1980 to 2004. And from Norway, Marit Bjørgen, the most decorated Winter Olympian with 15 medals, 8 of them being gold, all in cross-country skiing. So anyways, back to the main topic. Some of the biggest controversies we've seen in the modern Olympics. So the first big controversy we saw was the 1920 Summer Olympics in Belgium. So Budapest was originally selected over Amsterdam to host the games, but as the Austro-Hungarian Empire had been a German ally in World War, the French-dominated International Olympic Committee, as we mentioned, created by Pierre de Coubertin, was transferred the games to Antwerp in Belgium in 1919. Austria, Bulgaria, Germany, Hungary, and Turkey were not even invited to the games, being a successor states of the Central Powers, which were all defeated in World War I. Now, the biggest controversy we've seen in Olympics history must be the 1936 Berlin Olympics, where in 1931 Berlin was selected as a host city, but Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933 with the plans of transferring the Olympic Games into his personal propaganda, with the aims of showcasing post-First World War Germany. In 1936, a number of prominent politicians and organizations called for a boycott of the Summer Olympics, while other campaigners called for the games to be relocated, as Hitler tried to showcase how the Germans suffered after the First World War and made the Olympics into his personal propaganda for his political purposes. Now, with Hitler's Olympic being the most controversial Olympics ever, the next Olympics, also in Germany, this time in Munich, was the bloodiest Olympic controversy ever, with the Munich massacre occurring where members of the Israeli Olympic team were taken hostage by the Palestinian terrorist group Black September. So 11 athletes from Israel, coaches and judges were murdered by the terrorists from Palestine. In the same year, in a controversial gold medal basketball game, the US team appeared to win gold against the Soviet Union team. However, the final 3 seconds were replayed 3 times until the Soviets won, which by far is the most controversial ending to a basketball game ever. Moving on to the 21st century, in 2000's Sydney Olympics, a Chinese gymnast named Dong Fangxia was stripped of a bronze medal. So investigations after the Olympics found that she was only 14 at the 2000 Olympics. And so to be eligible for the gymnastic events, the Olympian must be over 16 during the Olympic year. And so the IOC took the medal back in 2010, which is 10 years after the Olympics. Following that, one of the more recent controversies in the Olympics is the AIN classification, which means Russians and Belarusian flags, national anthems, and uniforms would be absent from the games. So Russia's previous ban was for its state-sponsored doping efforts, which meant the Russian government supported to use steroids for their athletes. And this was too common throughout the past Olympics, which resulted in a punishment by the IOC. However, after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, today in the Paris Olympics, Russian athletes were not allowed to compete under their country's flag or anthem and will be the ROC as a neutral body this year in the Olympics. So the AIN classification is the main reason why we haven't seen Russian athletes being identified as Russian athletes in the past few Olympics because of their overuse of steroids. And this year, we're not going to see the Russians again because of their invasion on Ukraine, which is a reasonable punishment. So after all these past events and controversies in the modern Olympics, it's finally time to talk about the 2024 Paris Olympics. So right now happening is the Paris Olympics, where the Olympics includes 206 countries, each represented by at least one athlete, and an estimated over 10,000 athletes are expected, with an equal split of 50% men and 50% women, which is the first time in Olympic history where this balance is achieved. And athletes will compete in 32 different sports and 339 events in this Olympics. So did the IOC and the Paris Olympics do well this year? Well, halfway into the Olympics, we've already seen one of the biggest controversies in the past few years. In the opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics, we saw a resemblance of The Last Supper by drag queens. However, Christian leaders around the world right now are blaming the Paris Olympics organizers for humiliating their religion and making a mockery out of Christianity. However, the Olympics organizers are claiming that this was a resemblance of the Greek god Dionysius, who was well known in French culture and Greek traditions, instead of the Last Supper and a mockery to Christianity. So did the Paris Olympics mock Christianity? Well, while they claim to not be having any intentions of mocking Christianity, there is too close of a resemblance with the performance and the Last Supper. So the Paris Olympic organizers should have recognized this resemblance and took the performance out of the opening ceremony before the ceremony started. Now, the Olympics controversy so far doesn't just end with the Last Supper controversy and the opening ceremony. Another controversy was the gender controversy in female boxing, where Chinese Taipei athlete Lin Yuting was accused of her eligibility for the female boxing and her gender. However, the IOC has came out to claim and defend that her gender is eligible and she is qualified for the female boxing event. On the other hand, there's also the Chinese controversy with overdoping in swimming. So last year and in the previous Olympics, China has been in a powerhouse of the Olympics. However, in this Olympics, they've claimed far less medals than they have before, with much more steroids and doping tests this Olympics. While the Chinese has came out to claim that their performance was affected by their test and their exhaustion from being tested too much, the Olympics and many other voices are now questioning the Chinese of over-doping in the previous Olympics, as now without doping they seem to be performing much worse than they have before. Other controversies so far includes the lack of air conditioning in the dorms of the Olympic Village, which has been accused for far too long, and now American athletes are moving out of the Olympic Village. Now, obviously, not all of them, but some of them, including the basketball athletes, are moving out. Another controversy includes the South Koreans being wrongly introduced as North Korea at Paris Olympics. So, yeah, the Paris Olympics certainly has been one of the most controversial Olympics in the past few years, but there is more to be expected out of the Paris Olympics, and we should focus more on the other side of the Olympics, as the Olympics has been one of the biggest events in the past millenniums. And through so much introduction and explanation and discussions on the 1,000-year history of the Olympics as a whole, at the end, is still a spirit of the world being united together as a sport event. So for more history, science, conspiracies, and philosophical topics and stories, make sure to follow us, the No Brainer Podcast, on Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube. And make sure to comment below on future topics you would like us to discuss on the podcast and on their channels. Again, thank you for selecting the No Brainer